Sodexo is a fascinating company, I feel, because it's huge. It's the world's 18th largest employer. It operates in more than 60 countries. They claim to service 100 million clients a day, and yet it's kind of invisible to most people. Hi, I'm Gerard Sasges. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Southeast Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm an historian of technology, but kind of necessarily through my interest in technology, I'm also interested in issues of how capitalism works, what its effects are on labor and everyday experience, and how it's shaped our environment. So in some sense, I'm kind of an historian of everything. I've spent much of my work has been based in Vietnam, where I spent 12 years. And so a lot of my work is coming out of Vietnam, but in the last few years, I've really started to engage more with global history and how things that I see in Vietnam are related to what's going on in the world more broadly. So specifically, while here at Iméra, I'm pursuing a project that looks at a French-based multinational corporation called Sodexo. Even French people, where the company has more of a presence, even in France, for most French people, it's simply the company that supplies their school canteens, and yet they do much more. They operate the canteens in US Marine bases around the world. They serve food at the Super Bowl. They run retirement homes in Canada. They feed steelworkers in China. They are huge and yet strangely invisible. And so, through this project, I want to really sort of think about two things. One is the past of our past, the world since the Second World War, and the second is the future that we're maybe creating. Now, when I talk about the past, I think Sodexo illustrates perfectly some really major processes or events that have sort of created the world we live in. One is this fact that its early growth and development was really funded by the petroleum industry, because they supplied all the food and operated many of the environments for petroleum exploration, petroleum and petroleum refining around the world. And so this is where the profits came from that allowed them to become the company they are today. In the 1970s and 80s, they were really at the forefront of this change in the nature, in the relationship between capital and labor and government that we kind of call outsourcing, for lack of a better word, or neoliberalism. An important aspect of neoliberalism. And so, they are the outsourcer par excellence. This is what they do. They will come to your company and say, we will take care of this activity that you used to do. Now we will do it for you. And then they're also this perfect example of globalization, of this process of a company that was originally based here in Marseille, which expanded to the rest of France, then the rest of Europe, then the United States, then the world. It really traces this process of globalization that occurred in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. So in this sense, it's really about our past, how we got to where we are today. And yet similarly, these three big processes that I've just mentioned, there are three big elements that I've just mentioned: the petroleum industry, outsourcing, and globalization, all seem less and less sustainable today, right? Clearly, we hope that the petroleum industry will not play the major role that it has in the global economy going forward. Outsourcing has, in many cases, produced lives of precarity and worsening conditions of employment for many workers around the world. The globalization, as we have seen with COVID and now with the conflict in Ukraine, simply is not a model that works for us anymore. So clearly we have to do something else. And so that's the other thing that really interests me, is to use this project to say, well, what role can capitalism or a multinational corporation like Sodexo play in the future? How might it adapt? Sodexo has adapted immensely over the last 50 years, but can it adapt to these changes now? And if so, in what ways will it adapt? Or alternatively, do we need to come up with a new model? In other terms of speaking to this question of interdisciplinarity, Iméra has also been a really interesting place for me to work. I really appreciate the chance to work with the scientific director, Enrico Donaggio, and his working group on utopias and on labor. And I've really come to see this idea of utopias as something really important, something that I can really kind of use to think about my own work, because without these ideas of utopias, of something better, all sorts of mobilizations wouldn't be possible, right? In a sense, capitalism has its utopias, without which, much of this world wouldn't be possible, for good or for worse. In my own work on Vietnam and Vietnam's history, socialism also had its own utopias, which were incredibly important for mobilizing people for certain projects, for certain aims. And now, as we try and think of something, think of the world we want for the future, we also need these kind of utopian ideas to help us create that better, more sustainable, more equitable world. And so it's been really great to work with Enrico and the other members of that team, and also to have the opportunity to organize or to co-organize a workshop on that theme, which is going to be bringing together people from around Europe, but also colleagues here at Iméra. So in April, we'll have a 2-day workshop where we'll have an artist, economists, philosophers, sociologists, anthropologists, historians, all in the same room, kind of all exploring kind of historic fragments of utopia, whether in the past or in the present, and trying to think about how these fragments might be assembled into something new.